We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
That they are endowed by their creator
with certain unalienable rights.
That among these are life,
liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
What is your biggest hope moving forward?
My biggest hope is that folks know that a different world than the one that we have now is possible, and we can all work to create that world.
My biggest hope is, I think that there are changes that I would love to see, and it's really easy for those. It's really easy for everything to seem unattainable because it's so big. The changes that I want to see are really big, and don't look like anything I have seen before. I don't know what it's going to look like, and that's okay. So I think like my biggest hope is just that we're all kind of okay with not knowing exactly what it's going to look like, but knowing that we will all be equally dedicated to making sure it looks better than what we have now.
So I think, we as Black people have this kind of like, historical sense of fighting for freedom, but not exactly knowing what it meant for. Like our enslaving ancestors didn't know what freedom outside of enslavement and bondage would look like, but that didn't stop them from fighting for it. So this fight is literally like ingrained into our DNA from generations, and what we're seeing is not new. Like we have been imagining a different world, and we've been imagining, our existence looking different than it looks currently, and it's not something that's new. Like, we have been equipped to do this and to imagine ourselves in a different world.
I think one of my biggest hopes is that you start to love your Blackness. I think growing up in a society who sees you as a threat or sees you as like an enemy, it's really hard to love yourself during times. So to truly accept yourself and love yourself for who you are, and then spreading that love towards everybody else, that's what I'm hoping for.
My biggest hope would be that all queer people anywhere become responsible for all queer people everywhere. That is a quote that my friend Adam Eli says a lot. And I think that's within the community that I'm a part of. That's emblematic of what I'm hopeful for. And I'm seeing the beginnings of that. But I think that within our community, we need to start holding each other accountable a little bit more and really pay attention to the penguins on the outside, to quote Janaya, because that Sunday sermon was literally the most incredible thing I've ever watched.
I think my biggest hope has to be that these protests work and we see real change, so the next new generation won't have to do what our generation did, and they won't have to protest, so they could just have fun and live out their lives without having to worry about being discriminated or being worried against homophobic people and just stuff like that, so they don't have to experience hate.
I think my biggest hope moving forward is that these conversations become as accessible as possible. I know that we live in a time where everybody's really branding this and folks are getting book deals, and all of that stuff is amazing because we deserve to be rewarded for our brilliance. However, brilliance doesn't just exist on a single axis. I want to really speak to the person who's watching this who feels that maybe they're not enough. It's interesting that Future pointed out that I became a political commentator and was like on the ground for the presidential race and all of these things that were happening. But what many people don't know is that I've always been plagued by this thought that I'm not smart enough and that I don't know enough 25-cent words or, all these like SAT. And I'm seeing it a lot. And to be honest, it's been something that's given a lot of youth, and even people who aren't youth, it's giving them cold feet about really jumping in feet first and taking their place in this movement. So just know that your brilliance can look a lot different than somebody else's, but it's still brilliance nonetheless. And so you don't have to subscribe to these notions of what it means to be a real activist. Also knowing that there are moments, I love that Future said that staying in love is really hard. That stuck with me because let me go ahead and shatter the myth of it all, you're not going to agree with every organizer. There are going to be activists and organizers and other people who share a different perspective or idea around how to achieve liberation. But the beauty in that moment is that we still get to show up for one another, and we still get to support the same hopes and aspirations. And so just leaving room for that, to know that if you feel different, if you think different, that's part of the journey. That's how you become the expert that Future was talking about. You become an expert by trial and error. There are things that I've done and things that I've said that weren't quite how I feel now, but I had to go through those moments in order to become the person that I am today. So don't wait, just like we're saying, like, don't wait to grow up before you start to like take an interest in these issues. Don't wait to feel that you're qualified enough to be a champion of change and to fight for your life and the lives of those that you care about.
Hope is a muscle. Hope is something, hope is a discipline, hope is a craft, hope is a commitment. I used to think it was this thing that just sort of existed and you could just sort of grab hold of it whenever you needed when something went wrong. But I realized that it's something that you become committed to. And I learned that just in listening to the talks of Angela Davis. And that means that whatever I hope, I'm going to throw my weight behind it. And I'm right now, what needs to happen is defunding the police. That is what I am hopeful for. That's what we're fighting for, because when we do that, when we cut the city budgets for the people whose job it is to criminalize folks so that we can ensure that a Breonna Taylor and that a George Floyd doesn't happen again, it means that we finally have the resources that we can use and put in our communities around education and around healthcare. And that we can come up with different ways to deal with harm that's done in our communities that we always have. And if we reinvest in those communities, then we can stop the next Nina Pop from happening and the next Toyin from happening. And it's, so we have to see it as all connected. So that's my hope in terms of movement. But for people, for a lot of us, we got cast into this work. Pain brought us together, but love is what keeps us coming back. And to help tie in what, what Ashlee said, because it really spoke to me. And what so many of you have alluded to, you don't have to make people see the light. You don't have to be online in your comments fighting with people all the time. Or you don't have to make people, force them to see that you matter. You don't have to make people see the light. You only have to be the light. You only have to be in your fullness. You only have to shine. Be in your full power. Fight the good fight. And if you do that, and when you do that, you build the communities around you that you deserve, the kinds of people that will have your back. And now, I know you all, I have your back. And so if shit ever hits the fan, know that you can call on me. I'm there, I'm in this. That's what I'm hopeful for. Lexi, what are you hopeful for?
I mean, I want to piggyback off of what everyone said, but I think one of the biggest things is that, we continue to create, changes, not also on a global level, but also within our own communities. Growing up as a young Black girl in DC, I saw a lot, and I know what my friends have to go through on a day-to-day basis. And so I also not only just want to talk about, ending the systematic racism, but also, really touch on the issues within our own community, touching on colorism, touching on transphobia and homophobia within our own communities. And my biggest hope is that, young Black girls especially, and young queer youth, kind of what Janaya said during your Sunday sermon is really just, know that you don't have to, put yourself in this box. Know that you don't have to try and change yourself to fit into what society wants you to be. You are beautiful, you are unique, and you are important, and your life matters. And, with projects like these, like with the Voices of Gen Z, and with whatever platform I have, with this voice that I have, until the day that I die, I'm going to continue to speak up and ride for Black women. And it's also the inclusive Black women, Black girls, Black trans women, Black queer women, just Black women, period. And so that's just my biggest hope moving forward. And so I wanted to end this conversation with just giving a couple of sentiments from Naima. Just what do you have to say to not only this panel, but also people watching?
Yeah, I just want to say that, like, you are all so amazing. I feel so inspired just listening to you. And also just, I mean, it's amazing how much work you're doing. And I know that with all of that work comes a level of fatigue and exhaustion. And I think that that's probably one of the biggest takeaways, I think, that I'm coming away with from this, is that it's important to, I know we hear this term a lot, like self-care and taking care of ourselves and doing that. And it's sort of cliche, but it's really important, especially when you're doing this kind of work, is because it's such an emotional investment. And it's exhausting, not just to do the work, but to be living it every day. And so taking care of yourselves, reaching out to other people, doing the things that keep us healthy, both physically and mentally. And I think what I was hearing a lot here today is this idea of connecting with people who are there to, that share some of these views, but that you can rely on, that are, you know, not, I think Marley was talking about not being in harmful spaces. And that really stuck out to me, because I think when you're doing this kind of work, you can feel like you need to stay in there and fight all the time. And we don't recognize how taxing that can be. So listening to that voice inside of you, listening to what your body feels like. You know, they say that the body remembers trauma, and that's very true. And so it's really important to listen to all of those signs, all those triggers and cues. And when it feels like it's getting to a point where it's overwhelming, to take the time to take care of ourselves.
Thank you all so much. This was such an enlightening conversation. And I can't thank you all enough. I'm sorry, I know it went a little over time, but thank you all so much for joining this conversation. And I hope that you, you know, I don't know, you gain some form of knowledge or some form of just comfort with being a part of this conversation.
You help us, we help them. Compassion is ingrained in love. That's the answer. We answer to the opposite direction of the cause. Black bodies, they don't care. You see me unaware of what's on my mind. Black bodies, oh, I need you to see me, yeah. Got some good change in my heart. That's where change gotta start. That's where change gotta start.